Charles Dickens. Charles Dickens is considered one of the greatest writers in the history of English literature. Dickens wrote his many novels during the 19th century, but those novels remain popular even today. Literary experts admire his genius at describing the lives and personalities of the many characters in his books. Charles Dickens was born in England in 1812. His father was a clerk who worked for the Navy. Unfortunately, his father was not good at managing money, and the family soon went deeply into debt. In those days, people who owed money were sent to prison, and their families were sent to places called workhouses. When Charles's father was unable to pay the debts, Charles was sent to a workhouse, where he had to work long hours, and Charles' father was sent to prison. After a few years, the family regained its freedom, but the experience had a lasting effect upon Charles. As a young man, Charles Dickens worked as a journalist in the law courts and in Parliament, but he soon began writing stories for newspapers. These stories were very popular with the readers. Soon Dickens began writing entire novels for the newspapers. Each month, the newspaper would publish another chapter of Dickens' latest novel. One of Dickens' most famous early novels is called Oliver Twist. This is the story of a young man who is poor and alone in the city of London and becomes involved in criminal activities to support himself. The characters in this novel have a very wide range of personalities, but seem very real to the reader. The book exposed the conditions that face the poor people of London and helped to encourage reforms aimed at improving those conditions. Perhaps Dickens' most popular novel is A Christmas Carol. In this story, a rich but stingy old man, Ebenezer Scrooge, refuses to give his employee a day off at Christmas and refuses to donate money to help the poor. But while sleeping, Scrooge is visited by ghosts from his past, present, and future. These ghosts show Scrooge how badly he has behaved. When Scrooge wakes up, he becomes a kind and generous man who fully appreciates the spirit of the Christmas holiday. Another famous novel of Dickens is A Tale of Two Cities. This is a story of the violence and upheaval during the French Revolution. The story is famous for the heroic act of sacrifice that is made by one character for the benefit of the others. Dickens was famous as a public speaker, and large crowds assembled to hear his performances. When he died in 1870, he was a very famous man. The novels of Charles Dickens allow the reader to experience the life of 19th century London, showing the poverty and injustice that were so common. The characters of these novels show the range of human behavior, from cruelty and selfishness to kindness and love. It is no surprise that Dickens is viewed as one of the great figures of English literature. Women and the right to vote. In most countries today, people think it is obvious that all adults should have the right to vote in democratic elections. But it was not so long ago that women did not have this right. Only after a long struggle did women gain the right to vote. By the early 19th century, modern democratic forms of government were appearing in the United States, Great Britain, and some European countries. In these countries, most adult men had the right to vote in democratic elections. Some men were denied this right if they were poor or if they belonged to a racial minority group, but gradually this right was extended to all men. It took much longer for women to gain the right to vote. Only in special cases, such as that of a widow who owned land, could a woman be allowed to vote. Many men believed that it was not necessary for women to vote because they assumed that the husband should decide on behalf of his wife. Some men believed that women did not possess the intelligence or the discipline to vote carefully. Some women also believed that women should not be involved in politics, but many others wanted the right to vote. By about the year 1850, some women began to organize in an effort to change the laws regarding women and the vote. This movement was known as the woman suffrage movement because the word suffrage means voting. Leaders such as Susan B. Anthony and Elizabeth Cady Stanton brought attention to this issue and persuaded many people that women should vote. The first part of the United States to recognize women's right to vote was Wyoming in the year 1869. During the following decades, many other states recognized women's right to vote, particularly in the western part of the country where women had a high social status. However, the United States was not the first country to recognize women's right to vote at the national level. The first country to recognize women's right to vote was New Zealand in 1893. Soon after, Australia also allowed women to vote, and so did the Scandinavian countries of Northern Europe. But in countries such as the United States, Canada, and Great Britain, women could not yet vote. Women in those countries struggled to gain the vote. For example, in Great Britain, Emmeline Pankhurst and her daughters participated in hunger strikes. During World War I, 1914 to 1918, women's work efforts were very important to winning the war, and people's attitudes were increasingly in favor of women having the right to vote. Women then gained the right to vote in Canada, the United States, and Great Britain. Gradually, other democracies around the world also recognize women's right to vote. Today, it seems difficult to believe that women were not allowed to vote only a few generations ago, but there is still progress to be made. In most countries, women are underrepresented among political leaders. Perhaps the day will soon come when women are elected as often as men.